We are slaying monsters.
Don't let the ghosts and the ghouls disturb you, darling.
So in high school, I was frequently on the cryptozoology.com message forums, which was a really remarkable place for a 16-year-old Matt to be back in that dawn of the internet era, right? Where before your Reddits and all of that stuff, when you just had these super niche message boards, right? And I remember, because I got there because I was interested in Chupacabra and Bigfoot and all of that stuff. But I remember that eventually they got to the point where they had a creationism versus evolution subset of their message board. And people would debate creationism and evolution. And I always thought it was strange that that was on a cryptozoology board. But I learned a lot about it through that. And it's always stuck with me how those two things are entwined, which is part of the reason why we're going to devote so much of this episode to this debate today.
I'm going to be really interested to see how this goes, because I had never thought about cryptozoology being entwined with Christianity, but I did, and I think I've said this in earlier episodes of this series, I did hear some of the weird theories about how we can believe in God creating everything and then also believe in evolution in my church growing up. So
yeah. And to be clear, and I think I'll mention this a little bit later too, but this is not even specifically Christian based. This is sort of religious, not exactly fundamentalism, but it's religious conservatism, I guess, across many, I would say actually most demographics. That you will see this debate pop up even when you're talking about the Nation of Islam, or you're talking about Hindu or something like that. These debates still kind of return because a lot of it, as we'll see today, revolves around this idea of creationism and whether we can prove that there is a creator to all of these animals, including, Sasquatch, right? Or do we believe that all of these things evolved? And I believe they evolved. I think we all believe that they evolved. And there's very, very little evidence to the contrary, as we'll talk about today. But I think it's interesting to see the interplay here and to see how something that started as a very legitimate scientific pursuit with your, Bernard Heuvelmans and Ivan Sanderson and the guys we've been talking about so far, had kind of become more and more co-opted by a religious fundamentalist viewpoint instead.
We are slaying monsters. And we've got Maddie J.
Yo.
Here's Katie.
Hi.
And I'm EJ, and we are going to dive into episode 5 of Dinosaurs.
Yes, our Living Dinosaurs episode. Living Dinosaurs. So in our last episode, we followed the cryptozoologists Roy P. Mackal and James Powell on their adventures in the Congo. They joined up with religious missionary pastor Gene Thomas, and they interviewed locals to the region, often with persuasive items like medicine and beer and supplies. And those locals, in turn, regaled the cryptozoologists with dubious tales of what we call neo-dinosaurs, dinosaurs that are still living to this day. Now, by the end of their second expedition, Mackal and Powell were convinced that there were actual sauropods living somewhere in the vicinity of Lake Tele in the Congo. A contemporary of theirs, Herman Regusters, claimed to have even caught photo and audio evidence of that creature, but both of those are questionable at best, as we talked about. In the end, every expedition that was sent there came up with the same thing. There were a lot of rumors, not a whole lot of evidence. But still, Mackle, Bernard Heuvelmans, they founded the International Society of Cryptozoology in 1982, and they started funding more expeditions to Africa to try to find these dinosaurs. Unfortunately, that organization, the International Society of Cryptozoology, the ISC, was quickly invaded by researchers with other agendas that were, quite frankly, dangerous to the scientific pursuit. Because by the mid-1980s, cryptozoology had become a target for creationists. But to understand that complex relationship and why some of these people believe that if you find a Bigfoot, that proves God is real, we have to take a little side jaunt into the muddy pseudoscience of young Earth creationism.
Yay.
Fun. My favorite overlap. Religious people making stuff up and the paranormal or cryptozoological.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The justifications are so fascinating to me. The hoop jumping.
Oh yeah, we're going to jump through all kinds of hoops. Flaming hoops, maybe even. So we're going to start this in the Galapagos Islands in the 19th century. Because here, naturalist Charles Darwin saw some finches with differently evolved beaks and thought, man, they look really different than the mainland finches. And it surprised him so much that he wrote up these findings in a landmark paper titled On the Origin of Species. That paved the way for a radical new idea: evolution by natural selection. In short, environmental pressures can cause traits that favor survival and reproduction to become more common in successive generations. So basically what happened with Darwin's finches is they developed beaks that were better suited to the food sources on the Galapagos Islands as opposed to the food sources on the mainland. They were better able to get to those food sources. And that enabled those birds to thrive in the islands, which enabled them to reproduce and encouraged them to do so, which effectively bred these new beaks or these developed beaks into the population until they were commonplace. Basically, the ones with the good beaks for this survival were allowed to survive because they were breeding with each other, right? This was a revolutionary idea, and it rocked the entire world. Primarily because it challenged the prevailing idea of creationism, that you have a deity who created every single species on Earth as a singular entity. So that theory would instead say, well, God put one finch on the mainland and one finch here and gave them a different beak. And Darwin was saying, no, they specifically evolved to have this different beak. Much of this is wrapped up in dogmatic beliefs and the idea that this creator God, which often follows like a biblical Genesis story, implanted life all over the planet, right? The implications were really challenging for religious leaders. Because for generations, you've been preaching about, we have a divine God. God is perfect. All of God's creations are perfect, right? Because if you have a perfect creator, you're not going to have imperfect creations. God doesn't make mistakes, right?
Sorry. Yes. And
go on.
If Christians really believe that God made everybody perfect just the way they should be, then they should be embracing people of all kinds of sexual and gender persuasions. But go ahead.
That's a bit of a tangent, but that you get into then a person can make a deliberate choice to be imperfect, but God has put you on Earth to be perfect, and that's that would be the refutation.
Yeah.
That's why
free will.
conversion camps exist.
It's like the whole sinner. You are God doesn't make mistakes, but also he gave humans free will, so you can just like go fuck it up. Anyway, keep going. Keep going.
And also, like, I don't know that these two things go hand in hand, but they kind of might too. Like the idea that God puts you on Earth to be perfect and therefore straight, and you quote unquote evolve or make a choice to deviate and go another way. That's an affront to your God and religion, right? And in a way, that's sort of the Finch idea too. If God put the finches on the mainland, gave them beaks that were the perfect beaks for the mainland, then they shouldn't need to evolve. They shouldn't need to change because God has already made them perfect. I don't know that those two things are hand in hand.
I don't think Christians would equivocate those things because a slightly different beak isn't morally repugnant to Christians in the way that, two people who are of the same sex loving each other is.
I mean, it might be morally repugnant to Christians. I don't know.
I don't know.
My experience has been that all different types of Christians Christians that feel so conservative, take such a conservative view interpretation that would be arguing with you about something like evolution, because not all religious people would be.
Sure. Yeah.
Many embrace evolution.
Yep.
Yes.
Right. Yep. Many religious people, like, I like to think of it, they probably wouldn't think of it this way, but I like to think of it, religion for them is similar to how philosophy works for other people. It steers them toward what a moral compass and like gives them a moral system to think through, and like that's fine. Mm-hmm. But they don't necessarily give a shit about like it all being perfectly true and all of that kind of thing.
Right. Yeah.
Right. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Like, I think they all spin little circles that make sense to them and then move on with their lives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I don't know.
I think you're right there. And at least at the time when Darwin's Origin of Species came out, that to these religious leaders suggested if God's creations need to change, right? Like if God puts something on Earth with the ability to evolve and adapt to their environments and all of that stuff, then Darwin and his contemporaries are implying that God's work is flawed if it needs to change.
I would imply that God's work is perfect if it changes, because I'm more of a set it and forget it kind of person. You put those things in the water in the mix and they do their thing because I'm such a genius. I let them, they're just going to follow their path. And
maybe it's that, yeah, exactly. Maybe just like humans have free will, you like just set that stuff up there and then you gave them the ability to like do what they needed to do.
Well, it's like AI perfecting over time or iterating over time. Right? AI.
I guess. It does become a philosophical debate at that point, though, of when you have a God, does that God interact in every aspect of your life? Or is that God strictly responsible for setting up the universe and then has like fucked off to, the beach for a little while and will be back at some point, right? Like, doesn't care anymore or forgot about it or whatever, right?
He's more of like a venture capitalist. He invests on Earth and then he goes over to some other distant galaxy to invest in another.
Oh, fuck. Wait, dude. Sorry, I just had two thoughts. One, obviously, different types of religious people believe both of those things. Some people believe that God did create the earth, but like otherwise feel that he's quite hands off, right? But then other people feel that like God is intervening all the time, every day in your life and like is like very involved. So I think that is like an interesting question about like how then would you feel about evolution? But then if and when we discover aliens, are Christians just going to say that God created those too? And we just didn't know about it?
That's what I would say.
So this is a whole other big debate actually in like the alien UFO circles when you get on that religious side, which actually, and we're going way off topic here, but it becomes this question of, are the aliens created by the creator God, or are they outside the creator God? And I think that's one of the reasons why they're getting equated with demons, because then if they're outside the goodness that God created, they must be demonic. And now demons are coming from another planet. And what if hell is another planet?
That's fucking metal. Hell's another planet.
Yes.
Fuck yeah.
I'm like,
burning.
I mean,
Yes.
yes. I mean, that makes sense, right? Like, because the Earth was just like a boiling pot of hot lava when it first came into existence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and then also, if you go back in the old biblical texts, hell was actually cold, not hot. So it would make sense if hell was like an exoplanet that was really far away from the sun and super, super cold. Anyway, dinosaurs.
Each and are like, we need to consider this. Give us a minute.
So beyond all this, there's the confounding idea of how these beings were created. Because let's take the Christian Bible, right? That claims that God made Adam from dust and Eve from Adam's rib or his side. But now meaning the 19th century, scientists were beginning to chart humans as evolving from these early hominids instead of being plopped down by, in their current form by some mystical sky being, right? So then there's this ongoing problem with religion, because these stories of creation allegedly come from God itself or himself. So if we conclude that the history of our quote-unquote evolution, or at least of our human history, if we conclude that that is wrong, that means that God's account of it is wrong. And invalidating one aspect of the Bible calls all the other dubious sections into question, and suddenly God isn't so omnipotent and perfect if all of the stories about God are wrong. Basically, the Bible, or the Quran or whatever, they end up being very elaborate houses of cards. If you invalidate one part of them, the whole thing falls apart because they're all supposed to be divine.
But it's not hard to do because a lot of it was shaky from the beginning. A lot of it is a lot of like unbelievable stories.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. But it's still supposed to be dictated by this creator being, right? Mm-hmm. And just to be clear here, we're going to be using the Bible as that's the text that's most relevant to this story. But this evolution versus creationism debate, it's one that's kind of uniquely cross-cultural. Christians struggle with this as much as Jews, Muslims, Hindus. In fact, as recently as 2023, India removed references to Darwin's evolutionary theory from textbooks in favor of what they called more rationalized content.
Okay. What's more rationalized than that?
Creationism.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I guess rationalization is in the eye of the beholder.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I guess, I definitely get it, right? I used to be religious. So like, I never got it in that I never was like, I don't know. I was never so zealous as all of that, even in my most zealous phases. But I don't know. I think evolution is so fucking cool. I don't know. It's so hard for me to think about it as being threatening.
I agree.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems like the easy way out of this is God created beings that can evolve. Mm-hmm. The end. Then you solve all the issues. It's just that so much of this is wrapped up in all of these stories being accurate and true and correct. And as soon as you invalidate part of it, it allows people to start questioning the other parts. And as soon as you start to question a text or a dogma that is entirely faith-based, you run the risk of it falling apart. You can't question these things, right? Because then they get destroyed.
No, I'm just laughing because literally, and I think I might have told this story on the podcast before, so forgive me, listeners, if you've heard it already. And Matt and EJ, I know that you've heard this, but literally the beginning of the end of my religious experience was I took a class in high school called Comparative Religions, and we were talking about different religions. And at church and Sunday school, I was asking about Buddhism because I was, asking questions. And I was just like, hey, like these people seem like good people. And it seems like they're trying to do similar things to what Christians are doing and in search of like perfection toward their version of Jesus. I was Christian at the time. My Sunday school teacher got so upset at me, and then so upset, just yelled at me. And then the next Sunday, I was leaving church service, and our assistant pastor pulled me aside and was like, I hear you're becoming interested in Buddhism, and I was wondering if you'd like to talk. And while that might sound innocent to our listeners, she did not say it in an innocent way. Like, she was concerned that I was becoming interested in Buddhism and asking questions about it. And I was like, yeah, no. Like, my brain was like, if you can't handle me asking a simple question about something, like, this is not for me. And I did not think that it was the beginning of the end in terms of like me not believing in God and things like that. But of course, that's where it went. But I say this story because that is the power of asking questions. Not for everyone. Not for everyone. I think a lot of people ask questions of their religion and continue to be religious their entire lives. And it is true that if you let people start to question, like, what does this all mean? Or how does this all fit together? Sometimes they decide it doesn't. And then they don't believe in your stories anymore. So, like, yeah.
It's true. It's funny that you say that, Katie, because it was Buddhism for me too, oddly. I don't know what it is about Buddhism, but it came, like, I discovered that it existed one year in high school, and I was like, and literally, I was writing in my Bible, in my journal entries, I love Jesus and stuff. Like, I loved it. Very religious. But like, I had encountered this other way of thinking, and I learned that there were populations of millions upon millions of people who believed in this wrong religion. And I would talk to family members who were of the fundamental persuasion, of which I have many, and they were not happy about it. And that's the thing. I think that you can, and I know a lot of Christian people also kind of on the other side that are very open and loving and I guess just very open-minded and okay with questions and would be welcoming to questions. But the ones that I encountered at very specific times of my life were very closed and angry when I would ask anything. And that was really impactful. Yeah. And I think that if I had more of like open-minded, kinder versions of those people, maybe it would have taken me longer to leave religion. But to have that pushback, that negative pushback, that was really, alarm bells were going off.
Same. And I think too, like, I want to give a shout out, not that I am that versed in Judaism, for example, but Judaism, my understanding, is like a religion of questions.
Yes.
It is not weird to question everything in Judaism. Like, it's encouraged sometimes to be like, no, let's think about this. Like, and I think in a lot of ways that's way healthier.
It's way healthier.
Like, so yeah.
The debate over Darwin's findings raged for 7 decades. Racists and misguided scientists used it as a basis for eugenics and biological racism. They drew dividing lines between the more, quote-unquote, evolved whites and the, quote-unquote, primitive people of color, essentially to justify racism. We saw this come out of the Nazis. Scientific literature and classroom textbooks kind of pushed back and forth during this time, vying for territory in what was quickly becoming an intellectual war. And this all came to a head in 1925, when the Tennessee House of Representatives passed the Butler Act. That forbid the teaching of evolution in any school in the state of Tennessee and said,
It shall be unlawful for any teacher in any of the universities, normals, and all other public schools of the state to teach any theory that denies the story of the divine creation of man as taught in the Bible, and to teach instead that man has descended from a lower order of animals.
Less than 4 months after this act was passed, the state charged high school science teacher John Scopes for violating the law. Scopes refused to be intimidated by the $100 fine and lectured on evolution during a substitute teaching session at Dayton High School. He was charged in May of 1925 for violating the Butler Act.
So I was reading a little bit about this, and I did not realize that the ACLU had recruited Scopes to do this.
Yes.
To challenge the law. And I think that's super interesting because I think that what people don't realize is that this is how this happens in both directions, right? Not just when people challenge unfair laws and like push things in a good direction, and vice versa when people challenge laws to try to push them back in more like ways that I think we on this podcast would consider like conservative or regressive or something like that. I didn't realize that this was one of those instances. So I thought that that was super fascinating, and that he was like, he was a high school teacher at that school. He taught math and science, but they purposefully were like, why don't you go teach this biology class for 2 weeks?
Yeah.
So that you can talk about evolution.
And he encouraged the students to report him, too. Like, it was very deliberately set up and staged to call this law into question because they thought it was crazy. And then the ACLU also hired or recruited, I guess, Clarence Darrow, the infamous attorney. Darrow was just coming off of the Leopold and Loeb case where he saved 2 young men from the death penalty by delivering his famous hours-long closing argument refuting capital punishment. And so you had, him in his penchant for taking these quote-unquote damned cases, representing these underdogs, and Scopes setting off this media firestorm about this case.
The other thing that I thought was interesting about this is that the law happened and they wanted to challenge it. ACLU had put out a notice being like, who wants to help us with, like, who wants to challenge this for us? But the reason that it happened in Dayton, Tennessee is because someone who wanted to challenge the law or who thought that the law was bad, like, was like, hey, Dayton's losing people. It looks like, we're in an economic downturn. We're kind of like not a cool place to live anymore. Like, and people are leaving. So if we do it here, we'll get tourism. Like, we'll be on the map as like a famous place. Apparently, yeah, this was in the Encyclopedia Britannica that is one of the reasons that they found someone in their county. Like, wow. The people, this organizer in that county was like, let's find someone from our county to like do this for the ACLU so that we can draw attention to Dayton so that people will stay here and come back here. And I was like, wow, so it was also about capitalism or like trying to, or to like try to save their like dying town or whatever.
Yeah.
Which I thought was, anyway, that was just a really interesting sort of like side factoid about this.
So Clarence Darrow was an agnostic, and he found himself up against prosecutor William Jennings Bryan, a lifelong Presbyterian. In his opening statement, Bryan said,
"If evolution wins, Christianity goes."
The trial became a gigantic spectacle, and you had people attending the trial outside. They would have lawn signs. They were all assembled there. Some of the signs would say, "Read your Bible." And then on the other side, you would have people with signs that said, "Read your evolution." On the final day of the trial, Bryan himself agreed to be put on the stand as an expert in biblical studies because, he was a lifelong Presbyterian. And So Darrow got the opportunity to cross-examine him, and it's still one of the greatest moments in American court history. So Darrow made Brian recount the story of Genesis, the creation of Eve, and then said,
"You insult every man of science and learning in the world because he does not believe in your fool religion."
The prosecution objected, demanding to know Darrow's purpose in this line of questioning, recounting the whole story of Genesis and everything. And he responded,
"We have the purpose of preventing bigots and ignoramuses from controlling the education of the United States."
Fuck yeah.
Bam! Mic drop.
Well, but one of the reasons they put him on the stand, Darrow on the stand, or what they put Brian on the stand, Darrow put Brian on the stand, is because the judge had decided that the question was like whether Scopes had violated the law, and therefore there could be no scientific testimony. The judge didn't allow any expert scientists or anyone to come in and defend Scopes's opinion of the law. It was just like, the law exists. Did he violate it? Nobody else can talk about anything else.
Right. Like,
and I was like, oh my God.
It didn't matter if creationism was not scientifically correct. All that mattered is that they had said you can't teach evolution in the classroom, and he did teach evolution in the classroom. That's how they boiled it down, and that's how they made it illegal. And that's ultimately why they lost, too. I mean, Darrow lost the case. Scopes was found guilty.
Well, also, I read that, so this cross-examination was like a huge deal, as you said, Matt, but the judge threw it out and said that the jury couldn't consider it when they considered the question.
Yep. Yeah, because it was
Darrow.
It was expert testimony about something that wasn't relevant to the case. Right. Yeah.
I think that what it did, though, and you might get to this, was that it spotlighted the importance of this issue.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and that there again, the whole thing was kind of put up by the ACLU as a way of saying, if we let, because the other thing is that the ACLU was very concerned, if we let this go uncontested, even if we lose, and I think they knew that they were going to lose, because it was, again, when you boil it down to the very basis of the case, like Scopes did, right? Like he was guilty. But they needed to challenge it, and they needed to challenge it in the most public way possible to get the conversation started. So there was a hope that something could change.
I also thought a little sort of sub piece of this that I thought was interesting is Darrow putting the prosecuting attorney on the stand was like unprecedented, had not happened before. And the judge, if I'm remembering the Encyclopedia Britannica article I read correctly, the judge was like, you don't have to do this to Brian, because he was like, no, like, this is not, I can tell him to like fuck off, basically. And Brian was like, such an egomaniac about like religion and his knowledge of it, that he was like, no, I will sit on the stand and talk about the Bible under oath to Darrow, because what's he gonna do to me? And it's like, destroy you. But, you know, like, but yeah, Brian was like, absolutely, no problem.
Yep.
This wasn't like really a case of the law. It was a case of the court of public opinion.
Yes. Yeah, very much. Yeah. In fact, the jury took 9 minutes of deliberation. 9 minutes, and they decided. Charged Scopes $100, or about $1,800 today. 5 days later, the prosecutor Brian died in his sleep from apoplexy. The Butler Act remained a Tennessee law for 42 years until a teacher named Gary Scott again challenged the law. He sued, citing his right to free speech, and so it was finally repealed in 1967. In the wake of World War II, creationists rallied against evolution again, ostensibly because it supported Nazi eugenics, which is a little bit like saying that nobody should drive Volkswagens because that company was founded by Nazis. Just because some deranged sociopaths perverted an actual legitimate science doesn't mean that that science is bad or evil, no more than like Herbie the love bug was an anti-Semite. As the post-World War II dust settled and America entered the Cold War with communism, a new approach to this argument began to emerge. And you had lawmakers wanting to draw this hard line between upstanding, respectable citizens and the godless socialists who were, according to them, seeking to destroy their pure American way of life. Much of this has roots in the Bolshevik Revolution because Bolsheviks, radical Marxists, seized power from the provisional Russian government in an organized coup, right?
In 1917.
In 1917, thank you. Yes, yes, yeah. We're just gonna zip back in time for a sec.
Yeah.
But these communists rebelled not only against the government that oppressed them, but also against a religion that confined their worldview to a very narrow field. Karl Marx, of course, famously called religion the opiate of the masses, right? And claimed that it was being used to keep people distracted from their own exploitation. Piggybacking off of this, the Bolsheviks rejected religious faith in favor of atheism, and they lobbied attacks against the Orthodox Church, which was deeply entrenched in the ruling class at the time. Terrified of seeing this happen on American soil, or even just the threat of it happening, politicians, business leaders, and ideologues began reshaping communism during the Cold War to a rabid anti-religious movement. Harry S. Truman spoke on the spiritual faith of Americans during the 40s and 50s and did his best to try to drive a wedge between the communists and the Christian Americans. Again, having these communists as these godless, despicable people and the Christians as these good, upstanding people.
For the record,
Yes.
the Bolsheviks were kind of cool as shit, and we don't talk about them enough. Like,
Yeah.
I
know.
really...
We have to put guardrails on this at some point. I know, because I knew as soon as I was like, well, the Bolsheviks.
You're really
we
going to be
gonna
like...
go this way. I know. But you can kind of see how, not to harp too much on the Bolsheviks, but they were this, not exactly an anti-religious movement, but they were saying religion is being used as a way of limiting your worldview. And if you're able to divest yourself from your religious viewpoints and see the oppression that's being heaped on you, you're going to be better for it.
Preach.
And that was dangerous for America, which was a deeply entrenched Christian nation and had these quote-unquote Christian values deeply entrenched in American businesses. Now, alongside Truman's rekindling, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover partnered with the Catholic Church to begin an expansive propaganda campaign, as Jonathan P. Herzog calls it, a religious revival. Under Hoover's direction, the narrative around communism was shifted from a political movement to a more spiritual movement. And now you had these battle lines drawn as Americanism versus atheism. That was Hoover's idea, that we can make it like you're either American or atheist, not even American and communist or American and socialist. In a speech to the House of Representatives, Hoover said,
We should never forget that communism begins with the group, democracy and Christianity with the individual.
Which, if you think about it, makes no fucking sense, because democracy is, by its very nature, a group of people who are acting in their best interest, which sounds an awful lot like socialism if you just take a minute and consider it.
Yeah, I just Googled this because I think it matters to the point that you're making, Matt, about equating Americanism with religion, specifically Christian religion, because the phrase "under God" was added to the Pledge of Allegiance in 1954.
Yep.
It did not exist in there before, which I this is a fact that I've sort of known for a while, but I always, when I first found out, I was like kind of shocked. I was like, wait, it wasn't always like that.
Yeah.
No, we added it in.
That's
So-
also around the time that we put "In God We Trust" on the money as well. Wasn't there before. You can see how Hoover, he ties Christianity and democracy together, right? Like in his mind, they're a single unit, and across the battlefield is communism. So it's democracy, Christianity versus socialism. It's either or, black or white the whole time. By the mid-1950s, you have, "In God We Trust" becomes the national motto. It gets put on the currency. Kids are saying "under God," "one nation under God" in their Pledge of Allegiance every morning at school. It's repetition now. And the prevalence of this dogmatic conditioning is driving this message even further, that being an American goes hand in hand with being Christian. If you're American, you are Christian, as Herzog says.
Oddly, that doesn't seem very individualistic to me. But truly individualistic path would be people carving out their own belief structures and questioning things.
This is a quote from Jonathan Herzog, who wrote a wonderful book called The Spiritual Industrial Complex.
What was needed was an ideological inoculation, some form of conditioning that could not only identify the true Americans, but also ensure immunity from communist infiltration. Judeo-Christianity served this end.
The thing is, when the Soviets launched Sputnik in 1957, the U.S. panicked because Sputnik, this is the first time we're putting something in space, right? That was this marvel of science and technology. It's the first step into the space race. And who achieved it? Not the Americans, the communists. Now, suddenly, the Americans were afraid that Soviet science was outpacing them. And Dwight Eisenhower signed the National Defense Education Act, which sought to reform American systems and catch up with the Russians, because we were terrified that they were going to get to space before we did. They already had, right? As part of the NDEA, school boards and textbook publishers were pressured to update their outdated science literature. And so you had a flood of new biology textbooks being distributed to American schools with brand new sections discussing the latest in, guess what, evolutionary theory. Almost exactly 100 years after the discovery of the Finches, Darwin and the origin of the species were finally standardized in American classrooms.
I think that's interesting because that is still like 10 years before the Butler Act and like the other, I think I had read that 2 other states passed similar laws to the Butler Act. So it's still 10 years before that is repealed. So it's interesting that the federal government is saying like rewrite these textbooks. We need to be up to snuff scientifically so we can win this race against the communists. And you still had these states being like, no.
Well, so the thing is, and the issue is that new literature flew in the face of this whole propaganda push for American Judeo-Christianism. And now your leaders have a problem because you don't want these upcoming mathematicians, engineers, and scientists to fall behind the communists, but you also don't want them to be educated on theories that are undermining the Christian ideals like evolution, because remember that evolution was constantly being linked to like Nazi eugenics, and we certainly didn't want our students learning from Nazi textbooks. And then also we had linked atheism so hard with socialism. So you needed a religious movement that could bridge this gap, and creationism came to the rescue, unfortunately. In 1961, John C. Whitcomb and Henry M. Morris published The Genesis Flood. The book sought to recontextualize ancient, quote-unquote, ancient history, using the biblical narrative of the flood to kind of hand wave away evolution, extinction, fossils, all of that shit. Basically, the idea here being that the Earth was much, much younger than scientists believed, and the flood had actually happened and reshaped the planet so dramatically that it had been misinterpreted as millennia of change. This was clearly nonsense, especially since we have literally thousands of individual fossil records that prove exactly the opposite. There was no great flood because if there was that kind of great global catastrophe, we would have evidence of that. But we can chart continuous human habitation in North America for at least 12,000 years. But a worldwide flood would almost certainly have made the coastal Americas uninhabitable for some period of time.
We would know about a global catastrophe because we know about the asteroid, because it's just like there's a line. There's the before and there's the after.
Yeah, like we had dinosaurs.
Yeah.
We don't have dinosaurs anymore.
And that was a lot longer ago than 12,000. That was a lot longer ago.
A lot longer, yeah.
Yeah.
There's also no sedimentary evidence. So, in fact, there's actually sedimentary evidence that directly contradicts the flood. Like, we have deserts in the American Southwest that show no indication of flooding at any time. And their limestone deposits are similar to the White Cliffs of Dover, which means that they were both, evolving at the same rate. And then my favorite little piece of great flood refutation here is that we have charcoal from forest fires all around the world that were supposed to have happened during the time of the Great Flood. And I'm just not convinced that there would be wildfires during a 40-day rainstorm.
And is this the kind of stuff that Graham Hancock is trying to promote as well, that flood? Not to get into this mess, but... Not
exactly directly, no. Okay. So Graham Hancock is trying to prove that there was a previous society, and then there was some type of global catastrophe, and that society either like little vestiges of it continued, or we have evidence of something that's older that is not here anymore.
So it's not Bible connected. Noah.
Not to the letter, I will say. But you'll see, and as we continue to talk throughout this episode, there's a lot of this stuff that isn't exactly A to B. You don't say, because of this, God is real. But it's paving the roads for people to say, oh, well, if there was some gigantic catastrophe at some point that affected the entire planet, what could that possibly be? Oh, well, we have stories about this global flood. Maybe it's the flood. And then you get people starting to ask the questions that lead them to religion. So not directly, but kind of indirectly, yes.
Gotcha.
The Genesis flood was largely ignored by the scientific community because it was stupid and clearly creationist propaganda. However, it was extremely popular with creationists, including an Australian man with the comical name Ken Ham. Ham grew up in Queensland and cites the Genesis flood as very influential in his youth. Now, he graduated from the Queensland Institute of Technology with a degree in education and horrifically started teaching children. He quickly found that his students believed what they read in their scientific textbooks, which troubled him. Unable to understand that high schoolers were smarter and more logical than he was, he began rallying against evolution, saying,
"This put a fire in my bones to counteract influences of evolutionary thinking on students and the public."
Now, Ham immediately experienced pushback in Australia, and so he moved to the US, where leaders and school boards were much more open to his beliefs. He began giving lectures titled Back to Genesis, where he tried to prove that everything in the Bible was real, like the Garden of Eden, 2 female bears mauling a group of boys for calling a guy bald, talking donkeys, and Jesus cursing a fig tree because he was hungry and it wasn't fig season. But it's crucial to understand that for Ham and the majority of these creationists, that all or nothing take on the Bible is the argument. Again, if this book is written or at least dictated by an omnipotent God, it has to be true because that's what omnipotent means. Any flaw means God is not omnipotent. And if God is not omnipotent, then the entire core of that religion cracks. Around the same time that Ham was lecturing, another book was published by the Texas-based Christian organization, the Foundation for Thought and Ethics. That book was Of Pandas and People, and it took a slightly different tack on the problem. So instead of head-on claiming Christian God was behind all life and dropped it all on the planet, it claimed that there was evidence that life had been designed intelligently or by some creator being. And almost like if you took God out of the conversation, that would become more palatable, or at least easier to sort of insinuate into the conversation. Intelligent design, as it came to be called, is just creationism dressed down. Sometimes intelligent design is even dumber.
I remember watching an intelligent design video in science class.
What?
In high school. Yeah.
Wow.
It was like
that
comparing
allowed?
it to like, I don't know. I just like clicked into my brain.
Wow.
I definitely was taught evolution also, so I'm wondering if it was taught as like a both sides thing. Like,
That's
here's
interesting.
evolution, and then also like some people believe this, and then they like did it like I just remembered the analogy of like a watchmaker, like clicking all the parts into place.
That's one of the famous ones, is that like if you have a watch that where all of the complex parts work together so flawlessly, there must be a watchmaker, is one of their famous kind of things. But in intelligent design, God is supposed to be omnipotent, right? So every single thing God does is for a specific purpose. So the concept essentially is that living organisms work so perfectly, like your watch, right? They work so perfectly and so flawlessly that they must have had a creator of some kind. So they like to point out the human eye, say, or genetic DNA, how all those strands fit together so well while being so remarkably complex. There's no way something so complex could have been created without a creator, right? Or could have evolved without a creator. But those arguments are always cherry-picked to be the easiest ones to explain. The human eye is complex and cool, no doubts, but the human appendix is stupid and dangerous. It's a vestigial organ left over from a time where we had to digest difficult foods, like the fibrous, tuberous foods that we were eating. Or you could take the human tailbone, or a host of various genetic diseases like sickle cell anemia, which doesn't really seem to be a beneficial thing for the subset of population that is more inclined to get it. Or, as my very good friend used to say, taint hair. Because why would an intelligent God put a bunch of hair around the area where humans poop unless they wanted poop to get stuck in it?
I feel like you needed a trigger warning before you said that. Like if anybody's eating anything, please put it down. That's going to talk about taints. We need a taint warning this time. Like we need to insert like a siren, like a whole.
Wee woo, wee woo.
Taint warning. So pretty much all of this intelligent design relies on a God of the gaps argument. Have you guys heard of this before? The God of the gaps logical fallacy? Okay. So basically it's that if we don't know the purpose, the history, or the function of something, therefore it must have been designed by God for some reason. Just because we don't understand it means that God probably understands it. This is the fallacious assumption that everything on Earth exists in a state of being and is perfect, unchanged, never needs to change again. But that's a fundamental misunderstanding of how evolution works. Let's take Darwin's finches, right? They didn't evolve their beaks to be a superior species. They evolved to meet the food demands on the island where they were living. If you took those finches back to the mainland, they were going to struggle there because their beaks wouldn't match the mainland food sources. They would have to evolve again. It's not necessarily going for something better or something great. It's just where you are. Okay, but let's get back to Ken Ham and his lectures. With the support of this new pseudoscientific movement, intelligent design, Ham's new company, Answers in Genesis, skyrocketed. Still stuck on this idea that everything is exactly, the book of Genesis, 100% is true, everything in it happened. Ham looped in young Earth creationism, which is the idea that the planet is only a couple thousand years old. That supplanted the idea of gap creationism, which we discussed at the beginning of the series, and was basically the concept that many of the religious paleontologists used to balance the idea of a creator and dinosaurs. Even some of the early paleontologists that we talked about had that basically the 7 days in Genesis might have been 7 eons. What is a day to God, right? Ken Ham said no. A week in Genesis is a week in real life. It's 7 days. The Earth was created in 7 days and is only 10,000 years old. That's what Ken Ham said. Now, of course, Ken Ham had a problem because we have a lot of paleontological evidence that says otherwise. Like the fuck ton of dinosaur skeletons that we'd been digging up for the better part of a century, right? But young Earth creationists claimed that these were not as old as the paleontologists said they were. Some even went so far as to theorize that dinosaurs might have existed as recently as the Middle Ages, and maybe dinosaurs were responsible for the legend of dragons that came out of the Middle Ages.
They are, but it's because I think people in the Middle Ages were finding dinosaur bones and were like, what the fuck is this? That's my theory as to why people in the Middle Ages think there were dragons.
Do you know, sort of quick side note, do you know the theory behind the elephant skull and the Cyclops, Katie?
No.
If you look at an elephant skull, there's this big hole in the center of the forehead where the trunk goes. And so I've heard the theory before that was the genesis of the Cyclops mythology, because you interpret that hole as an eye hole instead of a trunk hole.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it makes sense. Because like, genuinely, think about how little people knew in the Middle Ages about like fossils.
Oh, yeah.
Or like, or how old the Earth was, or things like that. And then you fucking find a dinosaur skeleton and you're like, or an enormous femur bone or whatever. Yeah. And like, you're in Europe. You've never seen an animal this big. You don't even have elephants or anything like that to like reference. And you'd be like, I don't know if horrified is the word, but you'd definitely be like, something was here.
Well, you tell stories about it, right? You would have to make up what you thought this thing was. And you found lizard skulls before, right? And then you find a lizard skull that's a hell of a lot bigger than the ones that you've seen, and you're like, what the heck is this? Yeah. And now, finally, we're going to tie it back to neo-dinosaurs. Remember the Ishtar Gate and the quote-unquote dragon that was depicted on it that Willie Ley and Bernard Heuvelmans believed was actually a dinosaur, right? Well, that's exactly the type of thing that young Earth creationists were looking for. Because if mainstream paleontology says dinosaurs went extinct millions of years ago, but young Earth creationists can find evidence that there are more recent dinosaurs, even a few thousand years ago, they can validate their theory and invalidate modern paleontology and evolution. And so that is the perfect place for them to look. Cryptozoology. And suddenly, African neo-dinosaurs aren't just fun, exploration for cryptozoologists. They're a proving ground for the unfounded and incredibly stupid notion of creationism, or at the very least, intelligent design. So you have these alleged prehistoric cryptids starting to attract attention from fundamentalist religious circles. And all of a sudden, leaders like Ken Ham started to point to the Mokele Mbembe and say, look, that's a dinosaur. And evolution is bullshit because God made that dinosaur. Up until this point, late 1980s, when Ken Ham starts lecturing, the field of cryptozoology had been mostly dominated by legitimate scientists. You know, whether you believe that Heuvelmans, Sanderson, Roy P. Mackle, Powell, whether you believe that they were right or not, they were first and foremost zoologists, or at least naturalists, right? Searching for these animals without any type of religious agenda. They were just trying to further zoology. Their crime, if anything, is optimistic ignorance. The hope that the world might be a little bit more cool, a little bit more complex and surprising than they had learned in school. But with the rising tide of creationism, cryptozoology was quickly being invaded by a new brand of researcher, quote unquote researcher. This one, a dogmatic zealot, trying to prove that their religion was real and using cryptids as a fulcrum to balance their worldview. Now, the first blood in this water came from Roy P. Mackle himself. Eager to follow the suggestion of Willie Ley, who he very deeply respected, Mackle asserted in his book, A Living Dinosaur, that Mokele Mbembe might have a biblical reference to back it up. And he said,
Not only the behemoth's physical nature, but also its habits and food preferences are compatible with the sauropods. Both live in swampy areas with trees, reeds and ferns, a jungle swamp. Indeed, the identification of the biblical behemoth as a sauropod dinosaur provides excellent descriptive features in the biblical text and the characteristics of these dinosaurs as inferred from the fossil record.
So he was comparing what he thought was real, the Mokele Mbembe, to the biblical behemoth. He wanted his sauropod to be just like Ley's Babylonian dragon, but in the process, he had actually reached across the aisle and shook hands with these new researchers and gave them the opportunity to swoop in and pervert his research into something more religious. And we will talk about that and the neo-dinosaur conversion to Christianity in our final episode of this series.
I appreciate this connection. It's crazy because, like, when I was much younger and I first learned about creationism, I was just completely baffled by it. And then the connection of it and dinosaurs always sort of confused me. And I think it's really cool that for the first time for me, we're just putting that together, and it's been very eye-opening.
Same. Because obviously I knew about the connection between creationism and dinosaurs, but the ways that I heard it growing up were it was just simplistic, right? Like you had of course you had to make up a new story about dinosaurs because they're obviously older. And if you didn't, then creationism wouldn't make sense, right? So it's interesting to me to hear the history of how those two things became connected and like cryptozoology's role in that. I just had a weird thought. I don't know if this is true at all, but something that's always baffled me is how we talk about dinosaurs and like you learn about dinosaurs in like the second grade or something like that. And then we never talk about them again. They're so interesting. And it's like you go through the rest of school, like not talking about dinosaurs. And I've never understood why. And I'm wondering if there is something there in terms of like the lingering influence of like Christianity on school or something like that. I mean, That seems maybe a little bit far-fetched because you talk about lots of other things in high school that would also, you talk about evolution in biology class, genetics, all that stuff. You learn about it. So probably not. But I just was wondering because now I have dinosaurs on the brain. But,
We don't talk about it enough, for sure. I think, unfortunately, there's not that much to learn from it. Like you learn about the dinosaurs, and unless you're going into paleontology or something like that, we move to humans, and then you just learn human history instead of like dinosaur history, I guess.
I don't think it's that there's nothing to learn from it, but I think, Matt, maybe you mean that it's irrelevant when you have to think about all the other things that kids need to know to develop into functional human beings, and how dinosaurs used to have feathers is not as fundamentally important as how a political caucus is created, and I don't know how.
Well, they're not learning that either, but
I certainly learned it in school.
You might as well learn about dinosaurs.
I did too. Yeah, no, I did too. But I see your point, EJ. Even if you just stick to science, it's like there's so many concepts that you want kids, and there's only one school year, and it's like, okay, we want you to kind of be familiar with genetics. We want you to kind of be familiar with like human evolution. We want you to kind of be, familiar with like species categorization and like, there's like so much. So
I guess it's not deliberate, but it's not like deliberately censoring dinosaur knowledge, but it's more like, hey, we only have so much time, and there's a lot.
And you're kind of right, EJ. Like, dinosaurs aren't really relevant to our modern world beyond like, hey, there's a really old fossil record, and we know how to age fossils. Like,
right.
They're relevant, I guess, if you want to go into certain, like it's funny. They're relevant when you're a kid, and then we drop it, and then we pick it back up, and maybe when we go to college and we learn geology or paleontology, things that really connect us to dinosaurs.
It is like, when you think about it, of course they do it in second grade because you're old enough to start to like actually understand like what a fossil is. And and there's so many things you can introduce kids to through the story of the dinosaurs. You could introduce them to fossils. You can introduce them to like geological layers. You can introduce them to weather, right? Why did the dinosaurs go extinct? Very simply because the weather, but like not really, but but like, and it's like this cool thing that kids are into. So, it's like, so it does make sense. Never mind. Erase my conspiracy theory about this. It just makes sense from an educational perspective.
I mean, but the questions are good. Even if they're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. I feel like it's good to think about these things. One of my favorite memories growing up as a kid is my grandma taking me to the petrified forest around Saratoga Springs. They have a petrified forest that used to be open, and now I realize that they closed it off, probably because people were probably taking the old ancient wood and stuff, because it was like just scattered, like it was just all over the grass. I remember, at least as a kid, I remember like picking up ancient trees that had been completely petrified and just thinking, holy shit, as a little kid being like, well, this is millions of years old. Oh my God. And then also they have a Precambrian seabed in Saratoga that you can visit as well.
That stuff blows my mind.
Yeah.
It blows my mind. So
it's amazing, and it's so near to us, and it's so touchable even now. And so that's why I'm just like, why would you live your life so with such a pinhole of a view of like the earth is only 10,000 years old and Jesus made it or whatever? Like, no, like,
well,
it's so, the world as it is so beautiful and fascinating. Ask questions, have fun, just explore it.
Yeah. Ask questions, have fun. Because and I, unfortunately, to answer your question and not to get into a whole other gigantic topic here, but the reason that people believe that, as we sort of talked about throughout the course of the episode, is it has been 50 to 70 years of propaganda that was specifically designed to be anti-communist, pro-America, quote unquote, pro-America, because we don't want the communists. We want good Americans, and we need a God-fearing society. But ask questions, right? Right? Don't just go along with it. Like, ask these questions.
And if you are asking questions and the people around you tell you to stop asking questions, get away from those people.
Yes. Yeah. Any good, legitimate scientist, if you ask them a question that challenges their belief, they won't get angry at you for asking the question.
Not even a scientist, an adult. There are so many people that I had that yelled at me for questioning, for asking a fucking simple ass question.
I think also any good, worthwhile belief will stand up to scrutiny.
Yeah.
And be able to prove itself time and time again.
Yeah.
And not just have to rely on faith.
Right, because we just did it here. A little example. I was like, conspiracy theory about why they only tell you about dinosaurs in second grade. And then we talked through it, and it turns out it actually kind of makes sense.
Yeah. Well, thank you all so much for listening. And next time we are going to wrap up this series with a little jaunt into how dinosaurs became Christian.
The Jesusaurus.
The Jesusaurus.
If you're feeling generous, head over to slayingmonsterspodcast.com, click on the support us button at the top of the page, and consider leaving a donation or becoming one of our supporters there. That's also where you can find our merch store. And until next time, it is a weird world, so question it. Be safe out there.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to Slaying Monsters, the 40 in History podcast. If you like the podcast, there's a couple ways you can show your support. You can tell your friends, you can leave us a rating and review on your podcast platform, or you can head over to slayingmonsterspodcast.com and click on the Support Us button to leave a donation. For questions, suggestions, and other feedback, reach out to us, slayingmonsterspodcast@gmail.com, and stay up to date by following us on socials at Slaying Monsters Podcast. Your support helps us grow, and we are truly grateful to have our listeners and community.